We would love to hear from you what the Lord is doing in your life or have seen in others. Write us at stories@themillenniumbeat.com or call us and leave a voicemail at 407-624-9957. We at the Millennium Beat are looking forward to hearing what the Lord is doing in your life. Remember that the Millennium Beat is helping people share their stories. On today's show, I'm sitting down again with Joel Thornton at our temporary studio located in Lafayette, Louisiana. Last week, we talked with Joel and he told us who he was and where he came from. This week, he will be doing a little recap of his message that he gave on Sunday morning, August 2nd, 2020, at the Convergence Conference at One Church in Lafayette, Louisiana. Today's topic is a little heavy and not recommended for younger listeners. Some of the topics we'll be discussing is transgender in schools and human trafficking. Welcome to the Millennium Beat Podcast, where we like to encourage the world one story at a time. Now get ready to hear stories from around the world that encourage and uplift you. Now to the show with your host, Kevin James. So let's have a little recap of what you talked about on Sunday and let these people that couldn't get to hear, you hear in person, let them hear it. I'm going to let you go and I'll be quiet.
Okay. Well, Kevin, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's really great to be with you. And it's been a great conference so far. I mean, I came in here expecting a lot from the conference. On Sunday morning when I was speaking, they asked me to kind of set the tone for the conference and to talk about things from a national level and talk about. I do a lot of work at the national level on a lot of different things, human trafficking, some of the issues that are going on in the transgender movement, protecting. That's what Child and Parental Rights Campaign is all about. We're about protecting the rights of parents and protecting the rights of children, the parents who are having their children be really aggressively pursued by the transgender agenda. And so we spend a lot of time representing parents and helping parents understand what their rights are when they're dealing with child protective services and people like that. So I wanted to kind of set that tone and talk about just the difference, because, these are chaotic times. And I think everybody's a little bit on edge. We're all kind of burnt out. We're all we're all unsure suddenly. And it's like the America we knew has suddenly disappeared on us. And so I wanted to bring some sanity to that. So I started off talking about the COVID-19 issue and trying to put it into perspective. And I wanted to share with people here that if you compare America to Europe, or compare North America to Europe, so that you have populations that are basically the same, the death rates are virtually the same for the European Union and North America. And that surprises most people because we're hearing how bad and how out of control things are in America. But when you put us up against the rest of the Western world, we're right there hand in hand with them if you're comparing populations. And that's even, our death rate is slightly under the European Union's death rate, even though we have almost 2 million more cases that are known on COVID-19. So part of what I was trying to share with people is, look, this is a serious disease. There's no question about that. I don't believe this is a hoax. I don't believe it's manipulation by the media. I do believe that the whole situation has been manipulated, but not the fact that this is a deadly disease. And so I wanted people to understand that while we need to treat it with respect and we need to be doing certain things, we don't need to be living in as much fear as we've allowed to come in. And that's part of the problem we've got right now is that we've gone from the fear of COVID to the fear of watching our country suddenly look like it's being destroyed from within. And so one of the things I talked about was, if you look back to the 60s, the times in the 60s were more turbulent than what we're experiencing now. It doesn't feel like that, and nobody's talking about that. But if you look back to the radical riots and all of the stuff that went on in the late 60s, when the Vietnam War had really ramped up, when you had the Summer of Love had just occurred out in San Francisco, when you had the sexual revolution going on, and when you also had this drug revolution going on, and this, tune in and tune out, or, drop in, tune in. What was it? I can't remember it. Suddenly it's dropped my mind, but it's basically tune in, turn on, and drop out. That was the saying. And so you pay attention, you get high, and you drop out of the culture. And the people that were doing all that a lot of them ended up being very violent. There were federal buildings being blown up all over the country. There were fires. There were people being shot by people who were out rioting and protesting, and it looked like there was a serious revolution going on. So it was to try to put some perspective in where we are today, because if all you do is watch the news, you're going to live in a lot of fear, because it looks like the whole world has just gone and that it's deteriorated and there's nothing there. And so I wanted to share on that with everybody to kind of set the stage for, we need to not be living in fear. As Christians, we should be living in faith. I mean, none of this that's going on now changes what we believe. Mm-hmm. It doesn't change who we believe Jesus is. It doesn't change who we believe is in charge of the world. Right. Who created the world? God created the world. God's still in charge. He hasn't lost control. God knew that all of the things that are going on now were going to be going on, because he knows the beginning from the end. And so it was really a message of trying to help bring some peace to people. And then after I brought him some peace, I decided to start talking about human trafficking. And just because I'd been asked to share some on the human trafficking issue, because, that's an issue that a lot of people have heard a lot about. And it's something that you've got celebrities that have taken up the cause. You've got people engaged. You've got the whole Jeffrey Epstein episode that at the root of that, at the bottom of that, it was about human trafficking. That's what was going on. He was trafficking girls from all over the world and boys from all over the world onto that island to serve as sex slaves at his bidding and his cost. And so when you look at all of that and you see trafficking, you tend to look at it and think it's an offshore problem. It's an international problem, but it's not an American problem. And one of the statistics that always shocks people, I'm from Georgia, and one of the things that always shocks people is that in Georgia, we have 400 girls a month who disappear in Georgia and are believed to be trafficked. That's 400 girls from Georgia mostly. I'm not talking about foreigners that are brought in and trafficked. I'm talking about local Georgia girls that live in our nice suburbs, live in our nice subdivisions. We're not talking about inner city kids either. We're not talking about kids from really bad situations that are trying to get out. We're talking about kids from really nice situations, kids from good families, kids that are shopping in the suburban malls where we all feel safe. They're disappearing from those malls. Mm-hmm. And that's 4,800 people a year just from Georgia.
I have a question is on the trafficking. Is there an age group? I mean, does it go all the way up to young adults or even adults, or what is it mostly kids?
It's a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything.
I talked to Christine Dolan. I worked with her for a while. She was a CNN reporter years ago, and she's one of the people that really pioneered the way on the media covering the human trafficking. She even at one time went undercover as a prostitute to get a better look and understanding of what trafficking was all about, what sex trafficking was about. And she told me that when she first got into looking into this in the 90s, that when you talked about when people would order a child, they would order them like this. They would say, well, I'm looking for a kid that would be about this tall and 12 years old, 14 years old. And she said they measured them like this. And she said recently, and this was in 2012, I think that she and I were having this conversation. She said recently I've watched and it's changed, and now they order them like this. So it's all the way from infants in diapers, not walking, not crawling, all the way up to adults.
Sick.
And the trouble, it's the sickest thing you can imagine, the cheapening of human life to the level that you would think that you have a right to control and manipulate someone just because it's a benefit to you, and it doesn't matter the harm it does to them. And this is harm that it doesn't matter ultimately what happens to these girls, even if they have it relatively easy within that lifestyle. It's a lifetime change of a human being. You don't get over this. Right. They say the average life expectancy of a sex slave is 7 years.
Wow.
Meaning from the time they start, they'll be dead. Not they'll leave the business or they'll move on. They leave the business by dying, and that's because there's a lot of drug addiction. There's a lot of alcohol addiction. They use that to control the girls, and plus the girls, and now the boys. I mean, it's starting to morph over into a lot of boys as well. They will readily take this on to get rid of all the pain and anguish that's created. But the sexual diseases, the abuse that goes on, the fact that human life is so cheap that it's not just about having sex with these girls. Sometimes it's about having violent sex with them and not having to worry about it. But it's going on. The average age that a woman gets into prostitution is 14 years old.
You were talking let me ask this question. Let me try to articulate it right. Is the age you said is 7 years, and now is suicide a heavy in these situations? Because you figure the pain that they can't handle, the drugs, the alcohol are numbing it. There's a point that they're saying, it's enough. I can't handle any more abuse.
Yes.
So suicide probably is very high.
It is. Suicide rates will be high, but a lot of that is done through drugs too, overdoses and things like that. And they use the drugs to manipulate these girls and to keep them in a place where they'll stay.
Right.
And a lot of times these girls, one of the things you don't think about this, but if you're stolen out of your neighborhood, let's say you work at Phipps Plaza, or you're in Phipps Plaza in Buckhead, in Atlanta, the ritzy section of Atlanta, the place. Elton John lives in Buckhead. That gives you an idea what kind of place it is. The governor's mansion is in Buckhead.
Okay.
So you're talking about a very upscale part of town. If you're recruited out of that mall and you live in that area, they'll often know who your family is or where your family's from, because part of the recruitment is something like someone will walk up to you in a mall and go, wow, you did a great job today putting on your makeup. You're really good with that. We're looking for some people. We're about to start doing some model photo shoots, and we're looking for someone to help us make up the models. Would you like to come and maybe audition for us, and let's see if that would be a good idea? And this 14-year-old girl going, wow, this is a dream come true.
Right.
She goes off with them, and they audition her and send her back home. And then they come back and pick her up one day and take her again. She thinks they're going for more work, and they then end up trafficking her and getting her involved in the sex trade industry. She then knows they know where her family is. So part of what they tell her is, if you don't do what we want you to do, we're going to go pick up your little brother and kill him. Or we're going to go kill your mother and father. And so they use the children's families against them to keep them engaged and to keep them. And now they're doing this to save their family. They're not just doing it because they're trapped in it. They're actually doing it for a noble reason, which is, well, if I give myself up, I can save my family.
Right.
That's how twisted this whole thing becomes. Imagine the emotion of being rescued out of that and having to somehow overcome the physical abuse and the nastiness that we know causes, that sexual abuse always causes damage to the human psyche that lasts for the rest of a person's life. It's something they'll have to deal with for the rest of their life, whether they're raped or they're just abused or whatever it is. And so imagine having that kind of abuse over and over and over again, but yet you're doing it for the right reason, and the twisted psychological issues that are going to come out of that. Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
Well, we use the word trafficking because of what they're doing. We're using sex slaves and stuff like that. But isn't it reality they're being kidnapped?
Yes, it is. There's kidnapping is a part of the trafficking industry,
right.
And they're not always being moved. Sometimes these kids still live at home.
Oh wow!
So trafficking, you always think of trafficking as you're moving from here to there, but in reality, it can happen all right in here. There's kids in Atlanta that are sex slaves that go to school every day, but at night they're out on the street turning tricks, if you will. And they're boys, little boys, 6, 7, 8-year-old boys that are making some money for their families, but they're being run by other people, and they're trafficked. They're considered human traffic victims, but they never have left the neighborhood they live in. They haven't left their home. They haven't left their school.
Right. So they're home still.
Yeah.
But you wonder, what are their parents? I mean, a young child, 6 years old, 7 years old, where are the parents at nighttime thinking, where's my kid?
Well, these are kids from really broken homes at that point.
Okay.
When I'm talking about that, I'm talking about some of the worst neighborhoods in Atlanta.
Neighborhoods, not some of the richer ones.
Right, you're not talking about that because and that's the thing, is it has 4 or 5 or 10 different faces that go on in this as well.
Right, okay.
So it's, so we talked about that, and that's always a hard subject to talk about because it's dark. And it's it's the largest organized criminal activity in the world as far as economics. I think it's $139, $140 billion a year industry. That's a lot of money, and that's a lot of damaged lives. And so when you're talking about that to people, it really weighs heavy, and you kind of have to walk through it carefully. And I don't like to dwell on it too much because it's just the images are too dark in your head. And so we went from there to talking to what I think is an almost as dark issue, which is the transgender movement that's going on. There's a huge movement going on in this country and in Europe in particular. It's funny because it's not in a lot of the rest of the world at this point, that says that you can be any gender you want. And we talked about the fact that this is really a battle against the family. as the core unit of culture and civilization. But it's also even one step below that. It's a battle against God, a direct confrontation with God. Because according to Genesis 2:27, that God created man, male and female, he created them. Mm-hmm. The Bible's very clear that God made men and he made women. And that's it. He didn't make anything else. He didn't make a cisgender or all the words. It's hard to even keep up with them because they keep changing them. And you can be anything. And the argument they're making is that who you are physically is your sex, but your gender is who you are in your soul. Mm. So you can be have a male body, but you feel like you're a woman, so you're really a woman. Right. And that, listen, I could live with that if that's what they really believed, if that was all they were saying. Okay, I feel like, it's the Shania Twain song. Man, I feel like a woman. So, okay, you feel like a woman. Great. We're glad you're having a feminine day. If that was the end of it, it would be fine. But they go a step further and say, if you feel like you're a woman and really believe you're a woman, even though you're a man, you can start taking drugs that can turn you into a woman. Right. And that's an outright lie. There is nothing you can do at this point in time, according to our science, according to what we have the ability to do. You cannot change a man into a woman. You can't change the genes. Right. Every cell in your body has male DNA. It has XY chromosomes. Every cell in a woman's body has a double X chromosome. Virtually every cell. There's almost no cell in the body that does it. The brain cells are all male or female. Mm-hmm. There's no in between on these things. And so if you take someone who is a man and start giving them drugs to turn them into a woman, you have to start giving them the hormones of a woman, estrogen and things like that. The male body rejects that because it's not a natural thing. So you're immediately starting to fight against the body. Mm-hmm. And they also will give you something to suppress the testosterone, because a woman has some testosterone but really low levels. So they'll give something to suppress it and try to raise up the estrogen. And those levels then start a fight in your body that's a lifelong fight. You have to do this for the rest of your life to maintain any semblance of being a woman, because if you stop it, you'll go back to your body producing all the hormones of a man. And the same thing for a woman back. And even if you do the surgery, you can't turn a woman into a man, into a fully functioning man as a reproducing being, which is part of what God had always planned, was the reproduction of the species. Right. You can't turn a man into a woman, even though it's a little bit easier physically to create the appearance of a woman in a man, but you can't create a functioning uterus and functioning ovaries in a man. And so the idea that if you feel like a woman, you can be a woman, and now we can turn you into a woman, is just ludicrous. And it's destroying lives. But worse than that, as bad as I think that is, in our public schools right now, all over the country, literally all over the country. Now we've been in a bit of a relapse because of the COVID-19 and all the schools being out. All of this is stopped. We've had a short reprieve where it stopped, but we were getting calls before COVID-19 in our office almost on a daily basis, or emails from people saying, my children are dealing with this issue at school. My daughter is confused about whether she's a girl or a boy, and the school has told her that if she thinks she's a boy, and that she doesn't have to listen to us. She doesn't have to talk to us. The schools are literally, some of the schools, not all of them, are working with the students and not telling parents that students are identifying as another gender, which is one thing. If I come in and say, if I'm a 6th grade boy, an 8th grade boy, and I come in and go, I think I'm a woman, I think I'm a girl, and the school says, okay, well, we'll work with you on that. Let's sit down and let's talk about it. I'm not particularly upset about that. But then the school will go a step further and say, we're going to do everything we can to help you transition into a girl. Mm-hmm. And we're not going to tell your parents. We're going to call you with feminine pronouns when you're at school. We'll call you by your new feminine name while you're at school. But when we talk to your parents, we're going to use your birth name and your birth sex pronouns. And they'll literally deceive the parents and not tell the parents what's going on. Well, this is a moment when a child probably needs some counseling, some psychological, some Christian pastoral counseling, something like that. And instead of doing all that, they're encouraging these kids, not telling the parents and moving them on. Then they're passing rules on the use of the privacy facilities at the school. So they're saying the public bathrooms, the public locker rooms, the public showers. If they go on a field trip, the rooms they stay in at the hotel, you have to put transgender kids in the room that they identify. So I've got a boy who thinks he's a girl. That boy is now allowed to share a room on a school trip with girls. That boy is now allowed to use the shower room with girls after a sporting event. That boy is now allowed to use the locker room to change for PE, which is mandatory changing, with the girls. And don't tell the parents. The parents don't have any right to know. They don't have any right to object. In fact, in one case we've got right now that we've just petitioned the Supreme Court of the United States to hear this case, the school actually told the students, if you continue to protest against our policy, we're going to publicly label you as bigots, as intolerant, and we're going to discipline you in violation of student free speech. Wow. All that's going on in America. That's not just this case was out of Oregon. It's going on. It's about as bad as it can be in California, who leads the way in all these things always. But there's a case out of Florida that's going on. It's at the 11th Circuit right now on a bathroom issue with a boy that wanted to use the girls' bathroom, and he sued the school over it. There have been cases in Georgia where they haven't developed into physical cases yet, but there's school districts in Georgia that have transgender bathroom policies in the middle schools and elementary schools and the high schools. Wow. School districts in Indiana, Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Massachusetts, literally all over the country this is going on, and none of us know anything about it.
Right.
So that's basically what I brought all that good news to this conference.
Oh, and you were the kickoff.
That's right.
So it started from there. That's cool.
Well, I guess it's got to go up from there, because this is all fairly depressing stuff from a spiritual standpoint.
Right.
If you're not careful, it would be really easy to get overwhelmed by this. The good news is that you've got organizations like the one I'm working with, Child and Parental Rights Campaign, which our website is childparentrights.org. Okay. And so people can go there, and that we've got resources there. We've got some of the stories that are going on talking about what we do. But there are organizations around the country that are stepping up and saying, we need to do something about this. And we've decided to battle in the transgender area. We're not taking on anything else. We're looking at expanding it into the sex education curriculums, because that's where they're bringing all of this stuff into the schools.
Okay.
It's through the sex education from kindergarten all the way through. They're bringing in the transgender. And what people don't realize is this is the aftermath of saying that same-sex marriage is legal. But you have to teach it in your schools. You have to teach it as normal in your schools once you say it's legal.
All right. You said a couple places. In closing here is, if people needed to ask you questions, in whatever way, format you want them to get. Let's say that again, and we'll put description in the show notes.
Okay.
If you want them to call you, email you, websites, just spit it out. What exactly? So,
well, I think the best thing to do to get more information is to go to our website, which is childparent, singular, just PARENT, rights with an S.org. So childparentrights.org is the best place to go. And then my email address is jthornton, THORNTON, at childparentrights.org.
Okay.
That's the best place to get a hold of me, because that email comes to my phone.
Okay.
Comes right here, and I look at it. I'm looking at it all during the day, and I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to talk to people about issues that are going on in their schools. If they think they've got a case that we need to look at, we're here. We're working all over the nation. We've got an attorney. There's 2 attorneys in Georgia. There's an attorney in Virginia that's working on this right now. We'll be expanding as time goes on. But we're looking at cases all over the country. We've got a case, like I said, out of Oregon that's at the Supreme Court. So we took a case from Oregon, and we're in Washington with that. We've got another case, a federal case in Georgia. But we're advising clients in Massachusetts. I was on the phone this morning with a lady in Boston who's having issues with a foreign lady. She's an immigrant. Chinese, speaks English as a second language, and her daughter has been basically stolen by the transgender side to try to turn her into a boy because she thinks she's a boy, and it's largely over the mother's objection. They've confused the mother on a lot of things because English is not her first language, and she's allowed them to do some things that she wasn't comfortable with that I don't think she realized at the time she was actually allowing.
I'm thinking about, wasn't there a few months ago this boy and this father and mother conflict in school?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
It was in Dallas.
Was it?
Yeah. It was a custody case,
Right.
where the mother was saying the child was really a girl and was wanting to transition into a girl, and the father is saying, well, when the child's with me on the weekend, the child is a boy and tells me he's a boy and that he doesn't want to be a girl. And they had a huge fight over that, and they were trying to take custody away from the father at all. Mm-hmm. And I think that's still in the court system working this way. But those are the kind of cases we've got a case out of California where the mother of this daughter is fighting to keep California from changing her birth certificate to say that this girl is actually a boy on her birth certificate. Wow. And that's the kind of thing that's going on now. They're allowing you to change your origin documents because the language they use is real deceptive, because they talk about the gender that you were assigned at birth, or the sex that you were assigned at birth, like it was a random thing, like we're going, we've had 4 boys, let's get 3 girls in here. And instead of going, we used to do it, we used to look and go, that's a boy, right, that's a girl. And now you're allowed to go back and reset that on your official documents, which, imagine the problem you've got. Here's the ludicrousness of it. We've all heard about it. You've seen the thing out there that they made some of the feminine products take off the female nature of it and turn them into gender neutral products, because men can menstruate too. Because if you believe you're a woman, then you've got to be able to have a period if you're going to be a woman. Or the newest thing too that's going on is there. I just completely lost the train on that.
That happens to me a lot.
Yeah, I'm sometimes not impressed with my train of thought.
It's the products we were talking about, how they're changing things to make them neutral.
Yeah, and there's one other one that was even funnier than it's cervix cancer. There's a push right now by the transgender movement, which is the LGBTQ plus community. Okay, and now there's starting to be a little bit of rift between the LG and the transgender community, because they don't the LGB community kind of is having a little bit of trouble with it itself.
Right.
And there's some lesbian organizations that are publicly out on a national level against the transgender movement, surprisingly enough. So there's starting to be a rift. But one of the things that the transgender movement is pushing for is they're demanding that insurance companies cover cervical cancer tests for transgender men who believe they're women. Now, they're demanding that they cover it because it's discrimination on the basis of sex to not allow a man to have a cervical cancer test, which sounds really nice until you stop and go, the problem with that is men don't have cervixes.
Right.
It's something that only women have. It's part of the birthing process. And the cancer, one of the things they found out is that having sex at a very early age, at 12, 13, and 14, radically increases the chances of cervical cancer.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
And so it's one of those things that's becoming more and more prevalent, because we've just thrown out all the morals on sex, and it's no longer do we consider it outside of marriage, and no longer do we think you have to be 17 or 18 to consent to it. Some states allow you to consent to these things as early as 12. And so you've got this whole movement now saying that you have to allow men to be tested, and you're going, but why? How are you going to test a man for something he doesn't have? He can't have cervical cancer because he doesn't have a cervix. But that's how ludicrous this movement is getting, is that they're demanding equal treatment, and you're discriminating if you don't allow the man who thinks he's a woman to be treated like a woman, including in the medical test you get. So imagine the problem you've got if you've got a birth certificate that's inaccurate. You've got someone who's been through a surgery, so just looking at him in the natural, you can't tell. You walk up, Bruce Jenner, you can tell Bruce Jenner used to be Bruce Jenner, or Caitlyn Jenner used to be Bruce Jenner, but he puts on enough makeup and he puts on enough dress, and you're going to mistake him for a woman. Right. Imagine he shows up at the hospital, you pull his birth records and find out that he's a woman, and you start preparing everything like he's a woman, or giving him medicine based on the fact that you think he's female, and then you find out he's male. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong with this.
Right.
So the end result of all this is that there's going to be a whole lot of chaos. Mm-hmm. A lot of people with serious medical issues, and suicides are going to go up. They're saying that you have to allow the transgender because these kids are more suicidal than most kids, and that the going through the transitioning process will decrease the suicide rate. But the actual evidence so far shows that the rate actually increases on the back end. At the end of this, after the honeymoon period of 6 months or a year is over, that the suicide rate goes up 2 or 3 times for a person who's been through the transgender transition than it does for most people.
We're talking a lot of things that are outside of the church, and a lot of the people that are listening, whether through the podcast or through right now through YouTube, what would you say to the body of Christ? What they need to get their act together and start fighting this thing?
It's our responsibility as the church. We're the guardians of the culture. God put us in charge. He gave us dominion over the earth. You go back to Genesis. God created the earth. He created everything in the earth. He created man. He said, now you go and take charge of it.
Right.
I mean, that's not the literal translation, but that was the point. And I think what's happened to the church, especially in the West, and by the West, I'm talking America, Europe. I'm not just talking America, Canada, the Western world. And what we've done is we've turned inward, and everything has been about the church, and everything has been about what happens in the church. And we need to start motivating Christians to get involved out in the real world. Christians need to be taking their faith into government, into education, into arts and entertainment, into all those areas of influence throughout the culture. And they don't need to just be bringing it to church. It's no longer enough for your idea of evangelism to be, will you come to church with me on Sunday?
Right.
That worked for a long time because we were a very moral country. We were a very firmly Christian-based country. So the reality was getting people to attend church would usually change their lives. But these days, it's not that way anymore, and it's no longer enough to think that's our job. Our job now is to take the church out to them, and by that I don't mean going out and having a Bible study necessarily. I mean going out and being Christians. The salt shaker theory of change in the world, where you go out and use relationships to bring people into a knowledge of who Jesus Christ is and changing the world, and going out and influencing that. If we had more Christians in politics passing our laws, we would theoretically have better laws. We would have more moral laws. They say you can't legislate morality, but every law is about some level of morality, whether it's a speeding law, a theft law, murder laws. Those are all morality issues, because if nothing matters, then it's not immoral to kill people. If there's no life after death, if there's no value to human life, if you can kill it at the beginning of life, why can't you kill it at the end of life? And all of those arguments work against the idea that you can't legislate morality. It's all we do. So we need Christians who are politicians and aren't giving into the system.
Right.
And aren't getting corrupted by the system, that are out there making a difference. And we've got people doing that. We need people who are going into education, not to go in and share the gospel in the classroom, but to go in and share the love of God in the classroom by loving people exactly where they are and helping them through these crisis points. Imagine if transgender students were running into teachers who could sit down and talk to them and help them to understand what's going on and to see deeper into their lives. How many of these kids could be set free instead of being led on down that trap?
That's good. That's a good way to end this program. Everybody's listening. Thank you for joining in today. Joel, thank you very much for being here and sharing us your passion, what you're doing today in the society in the United States and outside. So thanks again.
It was my pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Millennium Beat podcast. I hope you heard something that was encouraging to you. We'd like to hear from you with your story, so write us at stories@themillenniumbeat.com or give us a call at 407-624-9957 and leave us a voicemail. You may also find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we have a YouTube channel. Please like us and share us with your friends. You may also go to our website at themillenniumbeat.com, and you'll find our podcast and our YouTube video. You also may find a calendar there with past and future guests and dates and times. Plus, another way for you to contact us with your stories or questions. This has been a Millennium Beat LLC production, copyright 2020. Views and opinions of the guests are not always the views and opinions of the Millennium Beat LLC.
You've been listening to the Millennium Beat with your host, Kevin James. I'm going to give you a little snippet of a show called Family Matters with your host, Paul Kindle.
If you want to hear more shows like that, go to KindleFamilyNetwork.com. Once again, I'd like to thank Paul Kindle for the use of his show.
Welcome to Family Matters, a daily look inside the real world of parents and their children. I'm your host, Paul Kindle. Peer pressure is an incredible influence in life for both young and old alike, but it's especially influential in the life of a child. Wanting to fit in and be cool, a young person will be tempted to compromise their morals to avoid embarrassment amongst their friends. Young boys are subject to society's pressure to be tough and willing to stand up to a challenge. Famous athletes and music artists are high on the list of influence in a boy's life. The problem with that, of course, is that many of these superstars are not living the kind of life we hope for our sons to live. And before you know it, you can't seem to put your finger on it, but something seems to be changing in your son's life. What you need in a case like this is wisdom. Proverbs 16:16 says, "How much better is it to get wisdom than gold?" When Alex was about 8, many of his friends were into wrestling. His favorite wrestler was a Christian. When I asked him how he knew that, he answered, "Because he always thanks God when he wins." One Saturday afternoon, I decided to sit and watch wrestling with Alex. Needless to say, I was concerned with some of the language, but the real surprise was the halftime show done by a group called the Nitro Girls. Sensing my disapproval, Alex reached for the remote and said, "I usually change the channel during this part, Daddy." And I thought, oh, I bet you do. But even the mention of not being able to watch his favorite sport saddened Alex. I knew this situation required great wisdom. A few weeks later, we visited Atlanta, and our host treated us to a basketball game at the Phillips Arena. The minute those 6 and 7 foot tall guys ran out to the court, Alex's eyes got as big as saucers. Instantly, I knew this was the answer I had prayed for. We bought him a cool jersey, a hoop for the driveway, and a brand new basketball. And on his own, he never watched wrestling again. Wisdom may be dangling a bigger, healthier carrot in front of your son and allowing him to make the change on his own. So if you sense that your son is slipping, just remember, God has lots of big, healthy carrots. That's Family Matters. I'm Paul Kindle.